Welcome to another Silicon Bites, and in this one we're going to have quite an intense piece of speculation, but I think it's worth putting out there for people to judge for themselves. Putin, is he once more fearing for his life? That is the question raised by a news story that has just broken, and one which is only reported in one outlet that I could find, which is absolutely extraordinary. Before we get into that, thank you to everybody who helps the channel, who is supporting the events that we've been running and will be running in May and throughout the year via Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Your support makes this happen. Your support helps us to do what we do and is absolutely invaluable. Now let's get into the story. Brace yourselves for an extraordinary piece of speculation. A friend alerted me to rumours swirling around Moscow and on Telegram of another potential threat to the life of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Perhaps that's not a surprise, given that his senseless war has caused upwards of 1 million Russians to be grievously wounded or lose their lives and has trashed the Russian economy. Unless he stops, we can easily see this go on to 2 million, 3 million, who knows? There seems to be no limit in what he is prepared to sacrifice for his egotistical and pointless ends. What is a surprise is that only one media publication I could find seems to have covered this story from this particular angle, despite the dramatic implications and inferences that can be made from this scrap of news. The UK paper, The Mirror, dramatically announced on 6th of May that Vladimir Putin's electrician for his secret Valdai palace was blown up in a suspected assassination attempt. But who was the assassination against, the electrician or ultimately Putin himself? The story has been covered in other quarters of the press in a far more conventional fashion that follows the information provided by Russian press services without questioning that version of events at all. And that official version is that a massive gas explosion in a Moscow apartment block destroyed a flat and some of the surrounding flats. Now, such explosions are not unknown in Russia. True, they are less likely in Moscow, which tends to have a better standard of infrastructure and maintenance, especially when you compare it to provincial towns. But in the context of the full-scale war and personnel shortages, such occurrences like gas explosions may be becoming a greater frequency, a greater incidence of those. But the issue here is that anonymous witnesses who visited the scene have claimed there was no smell of gas, yet the explosion was substantial. Reports suggest a smell of gunpowder instead of gas, and the immediate security blanket thrown over the incident suggests something akin to a cover-up. Putin's Valdai residence is an open secret, a palace located north of Moscow. Mikhail Mukhin, an electrician aged 34, worked at the Valdai Palace and has been left seriously injured after the explosion at his flat. Mikhail Mukhin is said to have serviced the Valdai residence in north of Moscow, which the Russian dictator is said to share with his alleged lover, Alina Kabayeva, and their 2 young children. According to the Telegram channel, Mikhail Mukhin is apparently seriously wounded and in a coma following this explosion at his Moscow flat. The same Telegram channel alleged that details of the explosion, including its cause, were immediately classified by the Moscow authorities, but the report said there was a smell of gunpowder or something similar at the scene. This has been informally corroborated by other anonymous witnesses who were close to the scene after the explosion and while the cleanup process had begun. Those sources also said the explosion was not characteristic of a blast that would be caused by gas, but was on a large scale, yet localized on the destroyed flat, and there was no apparent whiff of gas in the area, but rather the sharp and noxious smell of explosive substances. This incident raises the possibility of an assassination attempt, but we have to ask, against whom? Of course, you can dismiss all this and say that maybe the reports are just conspiratorial and it was gas after all, and all of this is just an extraordinary coincidence. But in a dictatorship, we dismiss such events as extraordinary coincidences at our peril. Dictators do not like coincidences or serendipity. So even though official channels would love us to believe in this sanitized narrative, I think there's value, in this case, in a degree of speculation. So what are the alternatives if we are going to dip our toes into this pool of wild speculation? Well, we must conclude that this event is suspicious and will have seriously shaken the Kremlin. One explanation would be that this is an attempt to show Putin he is not safe anywhere, including the staff that service his security and lifestyle. That very idea must be absolutely terrifying for him. The other obvious conclusion is this may have been an assassination plot against Putin that went tragically wrong at an early stage and before it could be executed. Either way, if we take the conspiratorial route and combine it with news last month that one of Putin's exclusive vehicles exploded in Moscow, then perhaps we start to see a pattern emerging. Perhaps poorly executed assassination plots, perhaps a way to send a message to the dictator. This surely will be triggering alarm bells in the Kremlin and would likely result in a huge security crackdown. The timing a few days before Victory Day on 9th of May also makes this idea of a coincidence less likely. Putin must fear plots by Ukraine, but it seems not to be in their style to terrorize those in service of Putin. So far, it's thought they have only gone after senior military officials and propagandists who have a direct link to Putin's war, and those propagandists who perhaps can now be considered an extension of Putin's military forces. So we have the suspicion that if it was a plot, it is more likely to be a homegrown one. There were other victims of the explosion, including nursery school teacher Natalia Leonova, and 13 others were reported to be wounded. Footage was released showing victims of a neighbouring 8th floor flat at the windows as it was engulfed by flames. It has been reported that they were not rescued after Mukhin's flat was engulfed in flames. According to the same Telegram channel reports, all case materials were classified. Even doctors were forbidden to discuss the nature of Mikhail's injuries with relatives, and he is said to be in a coma. It stressed the cause of the explosion is carefully hidden. That same Telegram channel published a picture of a man which it claims was the palace electrician amid these highly conspiratorial and alarming claims. Is Putin in danger? Well, we may be able to infer this over the coming weeks if a further intensification of security around him, and of course on 9th of May, is seen to be significantly tightened. Possibly such a plot would also trigger major investigations and a purge of Kremlin staff.